The world was astonished when Prince Harry bent his head and his voice broke into a weak whisper while the cameras were still rolling. "They're not mine," he declared. There was silence in the studio. The hushed gasp of the presenter, who had not anticipated this confession, the rustle of papers from an anxious producer off stage, and the gentle hum of the air conditioning were all audible. For a while, nobody could tell if it was genuine. The world ceased to breathe. Millions of people watched, repeatedly repeating the statement as though attempting to comprehend what they had just heard. What was he trying to say? Who wasn't his? And why did Meghan Markle appear to have seen a ghost while seated a few feet away? Please turn on the notification bell for updates, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel before we proceed. The script did not include the confession. It wasn't anticipated. This was meant to be a positive conversation about family, philanthropy, and the couple's new existence free from royal pressure. Rather, it turned into the most startling live televised event in contemporary royal history. Something unprocessed was captured by the cameras. A man who had devoted years to protecting those he cared about, all of a sudden crumbling under the weight of an unbearable truth. Just picture that moment. Prince Harry, a man who was raised under international scrutiny, sobbing in front of millions of strangers rather than in a palace or tribunal. He reached for a glass of water, tears streaming down his cheeks. Meghan's flawlessly composed public smile disappeared. Her words froze on her lips as she attempted to speak up. What followed would set off a storm so strong that not even Buckingham Palace could contain it. But let's take a step back before we go there. Let's examine the events leading up to that point. Harry could no longer stand the strain, the lies, the murmurs, and the intolerable truth. Because you have to look past the palace walls, past the tabloids, and past the surface of royal drama to understand why this confession is significant. This was more than the anguish of one individual. It was about betrayal, identity, and the dismantling of a delusion that had deceived the entire globe. The world perceived the royal family as content for many years. In the California heat, Harry and Meghan stroll hand in hand, Archie playing in the garden. With headlines praising a contemporary royal fairy tale, Lilith's first birthday picture went viral. However, upon closer inspection, there was a problem. Questions, small fissures, and contradictions that were asked in private but never addressed. The birth records were sealed, but why? Why did neither child's official hospital footage exist? Why didn't the palace verify even the most basic information? The general population believed it to be privacy. Ultimately, Harry and Meghan had expressed their desire to shield their kids from media interference. However, a different story was whispered by insiders. Every time those kids were brought up, there were too many gaps, too many strange limitations, and too many anxious looks. According to certain royal aides, Meghan's pregnancies were tense and unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Employees who dealt with royal paperwork reported strange security measures around doctors' appointments, missing papers, and changed timetables. There was a problem. Despite everything, Harry maintained a smile. He vigorously defended Meghan, accusing the monarchy of institutional neglect and denouncing the press for racism and cruelty. He portrayed himself as a parent and husband who merely wished to keep his family safe. However, friends saw a shift occurring behind the PR appearances and public declarations. Harry became emotionally erratic, aloof, and suspicious. He was described as haunted by some. Others claimed that he was fixated on the truth, which no one dared to express. Everyone anticipated a new chapter and an opportunity for the couple to repair their reputation, following years of public scrutiny when the live TV interview was announced. It was supposed to be scripted, safe, and encouraging. However, Harry's inability to conceal his feelings was evident to anyone who knew him well. He was fundamentally Diana's son, impetuous, sensitive, and frequently too forthright for his own good. It therefore struck him like a thunderbolt when the interviewer asked him a casual, innocent question about his kids. The spark of pain, the pause before he spoke, and the tears were all there in his eyes. Sensing the shift in tone, the host said, "Are you okay, Harry?" He inhaled deeply. "No," he murmured. The world stopped grinning when I said, "No, I'm not." Harry didn't sound like a royal for the first time. He was a broken man when he talked. A man caught between what he had learned and what he was told to believe. A man who was unable to maintain the illusion. He talked of betrayal, love, and trust. About acknowledging that sometimes the people you die for are also the ones that internally ruin you. He didn't give names. Not quite yet. However, his remarks were filled with grief. He said, "I thought being a father would save me." However, I no longer even know who I am. Producers were in a panic in the control room. Are they cutting the feed? Do they allow him to go on? Meghan squirmed uneasily in her chair, clutching her frock and crossing her legs. Harry wasn't done, despite the host's attempts to change the topic. He was trembling. The rawness of his collapse was captured by the cameras, which zoomed in almost painfully. The weight of the silence seemed to be stifling the room. It was palpable to all. This was more than emotional weariness. It was an admission. It was the truth trying to get out. Social media was immediately used by those who watched at home. "What's the matter with Harry?" A single viewer made a post. "Is he saying what I believe him to be saying?" Someone else wrote. The video started trending globally in a matter of minutes. However, even those who witnessed it firsthand were unaware of the depth of this rabbit hole. Because the tale behind that confession took years to develop. One that was rife with deceit, cunning, and a last-ditch effort to defend a lie that was too vast to conceal. How did it all start then? Given that Harry has lived his entire life in the spotlight, why would he risk everything? The privacy of his children, his spouse, and his reputation to say such things? And what truth could be so terrible that even Meghan Markle, who is renowned for her poise and self-control, couldn't stop him from speaking it? In order to respond to it, we must go all the way back to Meghan's initial pregnancy. That's what the world was told anyway. There were beautiful headlines, official declarations, and happy pictures, but there were also contradictions that didn't make sense. Every week, Meghan's baby bump appeared to alter in size, appearing bigger at times and less at others. Rumor had it that she used private clinics with limited access and avoided specific medical personnel. When some reporters attempted to verify her medical team, they were either silenced or threatened with legal action. Palace insiders acknowledged that they were kept in the dark, but Harry vigorously stood up for her. He doubled down whenever someone asked a question. "Leave my wife alone," he would yell. "She's been through enough." However, Meghan's defensiveness went beyond shielding her from public criticism. He was attempting to persuade himself that it was something more profound. Those close to the couple saw another pattern as the months stretched into years. Harry started withdrawing. Members of his own family, former palace employees, and friends from the army were all turned away. Meghan became everything to him. And the kids were evidence that love had triumphed over all obstacles, at least in his imagination. However, the fissures began to appear. Images from Archie's christening appeared strangely contrived. There was a delay in the official announcements. Even close relatives acknowledged that they had not actually seen the youngster. The secrecy doubled once Lilot was born. There were no witnesses, no confirmed documentation, and no hospital sightings. However, Harry remained silent until lately, when he started doing interviews once more. His tone had changed in some way. Behind the smiles lurked regret, resentment, and melancholy. And according to those who knew him the best, the shift occurred when he made a discovery or saw something that caused him to doubt everything. This is why this narrative is relevant now. Because it wasn't an accident that occurred on live television. It was the outcome of years of pent-up emotions, restless nights, and an unavoidable fact. Harry wasn't merely expressing his suffering. He was revealing a deception that had the potential to upend the very basis of royal ancestry. The succession, the monarchy's lineage, and even the legitimacy of some royal privileges could be questioned if what he asserted about Archie and Libert not being biologically his is accurate. It goes beyond controversy. In real-time, history is being rewritten. Royal secrets have always captivated the world, but this one strikes a particular chord since it is fundamentally about love, treachery, and the intolerable price of silence. It concerns a man who is caught between truth and loyalty, a wife whose secrets may have finally come to light, and a father who is unsure if the kids he put to bed were ever really his. The world is waiting now. The palace doesn't say anything. People are asking more questions than ever before, but Meghan's staff won't comment. Who are Libet and Archie? In reality, where were they born? And why does every evidentiary trail seem to come to a standstill? Despite its spontaneity, Harry's confession had significance. He was attempting to convey a message to us, something no one was supposed to hear. For far too long, he has been bearing this burden alone. He was crying for more than simply heartache. They have to do with freedom. A man at last releasing himself from a deception that has been consuming him. However, the issue still stands. What reality did he learn that ultimately broke him? And why? The interview itself is where the answer now starts. The one that made all the difference. When the reporter moved forward and said, how have your children changed your life? Harry hesitated, turning a seemingly benign question into the confession that would rock the monarchy. That pause was captured by the cameras. It was thick and drawn out, and when he did speak, the words weren't polished or practiced. They emerged shaking. They produced "I've been living a lie, I realize." The audience let out a gasp. Meghan froze, and everyone in the room realized that something enormous had just started at that precise instant. However, nobody anticipated what would happen next, which would alter everything. It was meant to be a low-key broadcast in the afternoon, a charity program that was shot in Los Angeles with gentle lighting, lighthearted humor, and just the right amount of sincerity to win over audiences worldwide. The creators of the show had meticulously arranged every detail. The camera angles that would depict Harry and Meghan's strong friendship, the cue cards, and the laughter breaks. The stillness that ensued after a single devastating question was something they had not anticipated. Harry appeared at ease as the interviewer leaned in and gave him the "I'm about to make you emotional for the camera" smile. Meghan smiled nicely, crossed her legs, and wiped an undetectable stain off her clothing. The crowd was kind. The lights were attractive. It was meant to be secure. The question then vanished. "Harry, how have your kids changed you?" It's a harmless, innocent inquiry, the kind that every famous parent responds to with a chuckle and a few words about happiness, tolerance, or bedtime pandemonium. However, it wasn't harmless for Harry. It was a velvet-wrapped dagger. He tried to smile at first. His mouth's corners quivered as if they were struggling with gravity. Then came the pause, that weird, weighty silence that psychologists analyze and producers fear. His gaze flicked to Meghan for a moment. She glanced back for a time. That moment in time when two people knew that everyone was watching and that the truth was going to be revealed. Harry felt like he was swallowing glass as his throat moved. His fingers shook so much that the glass clinked on the table as he reached for his water. The host gave an uncomfortable laugh. "A challenging question, huh?" Harry didn't chuckle. He gazed at the ground. Then he said something no one was expecting to hear, as if the dam inside him had finally burst. Everything was altered by them. His voice was nearly trembling as he stopped once more. "They opened my eyes." The presenter leaned in. "Indeed." Harry raised his head, tears sparkling in his fiery eyes. "They helped me see that I had been living a false life." The room could have been completely engulfed by the hush that ensued. Nobody said anything. Nobody made a move. Meghan's expression froze into that half-smile, half-frown that only happens when pride and panic collide. Uncertain if they were seeing a breakdown or an act, the audience looked at one another. In the control room, the producers fumbled. "Cut to a commercial, zoom out. Turn down the microphone." However, nobody dared to speak up. Harry wasn't done yet. As he went on, his voice broke. "I've worked to keep my family safe for years. I believed that what I was doing was correct. I believed that love was sufficient." The host squirmed uneasily and looked away from the camera for guidance. However, the hollow, eerie expression in Harry's eyes said it all. It wasn't acting. This wasn't just another publicity gimmick. On live broadcast, a man was disintegrating. Meghan's posture was tense, as you could see. With her hands clenched and her fingernails driving into her palm, she sat rigidly. She attempted to interject. Harry meant to say, but he softly lifted a hand to interrupt her in the middle of her sentence. "No," he muttered. The audience leaned in and said, "Let me finish." The cameras enlarged. Every moment seemed to last forever. He stated it after that. The words hung in the air, heavier than lead. "They're not mine." Unsure of what to say, the host blinked and stammered. Harry took a while to respond, saying, "I'm sorry." "What do you mean?" He fought back tears as he closed his eyes and pressed his fingers to his temples. Everything was captured in the live broadcast. The long breath, the grief, the twitch in his jaw. Meghan's face went white. Her microphone caught up what she was whispering under her breath. "Not in this place. Not right now." However, it was too late. Social media took off all over the world. Hashtags like, Royal Bombshell and Harry Breakdown started to trend in a matter of minutes. News organizations rushed to cut the video. According to reports, palace aides were notified in the middle of the broadcast. Nevertheless, Harry didn't care about any of it at the time. The consequences were not on his mind. He was reflecting on the years of quiet that had brought him to this point. When he did speak again, it was in a steady, unsettling tone. "They're not mine," he said again, his words getting sharper by the moment. "And I am no longer able to pretend. The host took a deep breath. What are you saying? Harry cut me off. I'm saying I was lied to. I'm suggesting that what I believe to be true about my family may not be. Meghan moved around in her chair. The camera saw her chewing her lip, her composed exterior starting to fall apart. She made a grab for "Please stop," she whispered into Harry's arm, but he didn't even glance at her. His gaze was riveted on something distant, something that only he could see. I believed in love, he went on. Family is important to me, but love isn't always what you think it is. With an uncomfortable smile for the audience, the presenter attempted to reclaim the topic. We are aware that feelings are intense. No, Harry repeated. You don't comprehend. You are unable to. The control room ultimately cut to a commercial break at that point. The screen faded to darkness for viewers at home. However, mayhem broke out in the studio. Angry, Meghan got to her feet and gave Harry a stern whisper. In an attempt to calm them down, crew workers hurried onto the stage. We're still live in some regions, exclaimed one producer, while another called for security to disperse the crowd. Harry, though, was not upset. He felt numb. With tears flowing down his face, he sat there gazing into nothing. It was the most human they had ever seen him, according to a royal assistant who later spoke anonymously. A guy finally crumbling beneath the weight of secrets. He refused to move when Meghan attempted to tug him in the direction of the exit. He simply said something beneath his breath several times. One phrase stuck out even if the aide couldn't hear everything. It's finished. The cameras steered clear of close-ups as the show came back from commercial. Everyone watching realized the harm had already been done, even though the host hastily thanked everyone for tuning in and promised a lovely discussion on parenthood later in the program. Within hours, the interview's clips went viral. Whether Harry had been tricked, worn out, or just overpowered was a topic of discussion among pundits. Others questioned whether this was the beginning of a royal crisis that would completely upend the monarchy. It was dubbed a meltdown by some. Others ultimately broke free and referred to it as the truth. However, the question that reverberated throughout was straightforward. When Harry said, "They're not mine," what did he mean? The Globe started digging to find out. Fans, journalists, and even former palace insiders. People began watching old video again and examining each picture, phrase, and detail. And what they discovered was buried deep within the enigma. Because Harry had already displayed fissures in his facade. In a podcast interview months prior, he had cryptically discussed how fatherhood taught him unexpected lessons about honesty and identity. He also said that the most difficult aspect of family life is trust. Although nobody gave it any thought at the time, such statements now seemed like covert pleas for assistance. Even normally reticent palace sources started to murmur. We've known something was wrong for a long time. We just didn't know how bad, a senior assistant reportedly said to a journalist off camera. Harry was missing that evening following the program. There was no trace of the couple, but reporters positioned outside his Montecito residence watched security cars come and go. Insiders disagreed with Meghan's team's brief statement, which said Harry was emotionally upset and needing time for introspection. One buddy claims that Harry departed the house that evening and spent the night by himself at a hotel close to Santa Barbara. Those close to him claim that he replayed all he had spoken while gazing at the water for hours on end. He was afraid of more than just the consequences. He was afraid of what would happen next. Because you can't go back once you've told the truth. In the meantime, Buckingham Palace in London convened an urgent meeting. Advisors were in startled silence as they watched the video. Insiders claim that William was silent and pale, saying only, "He's gone too far this time," while Charles slapped his hand on the table and muttered, "He's lost his mind." However, underneath the indignation was fear. Because if Harry's claims were accurate, the consequences would be disastrous, casting doubt on the validity of the royal lineage, the issue of succession, and the whole basis of the monarchy's reputation. The worst aspect is that this wasn't a rumor from a tabloid. This was a prince claiming on live television that his kids weren't his. Speculation intensified over the course of the following day. The video was repeatedly shown by news anchors. His body language was examined by psychologists. There were a ton of speculations on social media, ranging from royal cover-ups to covert surrogacy. Harry was thought to be suffering a breakdown by some. Others said he had finally lost his temper after being silenced for years. Above all the commotion, though, was one question. What reality had brought Harry thus far? What transpired on live TV, according to insiders, wasn't spontaneous. It was the outcome of weeks or even months of pent-up emotions. Harry had been struggling with uncertainty, guilt, and inner torment. Behind closed doors, something had occurred. Something that caused him to doubt every aspect of his family and marriage. And that something started when an old palace servant sent out a warning, as we'll soon discover. One that would entice Harry into a mystery more sinister than he could have ever dreamed. Because Harry's blood ran cold when he saw a message on his phone after the broadcast concluded and the lights went down. The message flashed on Harry's phone like a ghost from the past and said, "You were right to tell the truth. Now be ready for what comes next." But what came next would change everything, and no one, not even Harry, was prepared for it. Just 12 terrifying words, no context, no name. He gazed at it for a long moment before saying, "You were right to tell the truth. Now be ready for what comes next." His tear-stained visage reflected the screen's glow. The night in California was peaceful outside the hotel window. However, a tempest was building inside Harry's chest. His admission had gone viral. Every journalist, every palace hallway, and every royal insider had already heard what he had to say. There was no way to accept it. Back. Buckingham Palace was in disarray on the other side of the Atlantic. The palace switchboard was inundated with calls within an hour of the interview showing in the UK. Advisors were awakened from slumber. Outside the gates, news crews gathered. The most dreaded phrase of the royal family reverberated down the marble corridors. A crisis. One by one, lights flickered on in the palace's private chambers. Emergency conference rooms were filled with senior assistants. They had their phones up to their ears. On one call, a tired press officer muttered, "We can't spin this. It's on camera. It's everywhere." Another whispered, "He's just accused his wife of lying about their children. How do we contain that?" But this wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was an existential threat. The monarchy wasn't built for this kind of scandal. It survived affairs, divorces, and tragedies, but never something that struck at its bloodline. He rubbed his head and muttered, "Dear God," as advisors read passages from the transcript that said, "They're not mine." "Charles, he's emotional," Camilla said, attempting to soothe him. Charles shook his head, saying, "No, you don't say that on live television unless you mean it," even though he didn't mean it literally. He is not stupid, but he is broken. Meanwhile, William paced the room, his jaw clenched. He's gone too far this time. He's dragging the family through hell because he can't handle his own mistakes. An aide interrupted, handing William a tablet. "Sir, there's something else. Look at this." On the screen was a clip that hadn't made it to broadcast. Behind-the-scenes footage captured by a studio crew's phone. It showed Meghan turning to Harry, whispering furiously, "Stop it! You'll ruin both of us." "Us both?" Charles said, slamming the table. "What does that signify?" The room went quiet. Across London, royal correspondents scrambled to make sense of it all. The BBC held an emergency editorial meeting trying to decide how much of the interview could be legally aired in full. Tabloids were already publishing front-page mock-ups. One headline read, "Prince of Pain, Harry's Tears of Betrayal." "The biggest royal scandal since Diana," stated another. The royal machine thrived on silence, the kind that could bury even the loudest truth. That night, an urgent call was made to Kensington Palace, and William was told to remain silent. The public was divided. Some sympathized with Harry, a man pushed too far by lies and manipulation. Others accused him of treason, of destroying what little dignity the royal family had left. But amid the commotion, one detail caught everyone's attention. The phrase, "living a lie." Was it about Meghan, the monarchy, or the kids? An advisor replied, "No words, no reactions. We must assess the damage first." However, William was unable to remain motionless and repeatedly called Harry, receiving no response. He texted, "For God's sake, what are you doing? Consider the kids." Nothing changed. Back in California, Harry sat by the sea with his phone ringing nonstop. His lawyer, publicist, and even Oprah called, but he ignored them all. The only person he wanted to hear from was silent Meghan. He relived the interview in his mind, each word reverberating like a curse. "They're not mine." What had he done? Was he free now, or had he just ruined his life? He didn't know. All he knew was that the truth was finally out, and he felt both lighter and more alone than before. Then his phone buzzed again, saying, "Check your email. You'll understand everything." His heart raced as he opened his laptop and logged in. There was a single new message with an attachment labeled Confidential Lineage File. The sender's name was blocked, and there was only one sentence in the body. This is what they didn't want you to see. A part of him didn't want to know, but curiosity, fear, and the dim hope that maybe this could explain everything drove him to click. The document opened with a watermark of a royal crest. It contained dozens of names, dates, and medical entries, some redacted, others marked maternal genetic source unverified at the bottom of the first page. Harry's hands shuddered as he continued to scan through the contradictory entries for Archie and Lilith. The attending physician's signature was missing from their medical files, and there were 2 words in the margin, handwritten and faded ink, that made his stomach turn over and over again. Borrowed placement. What did that even mean? He called the number from the text, but it was disconnected. His mind raced, wondering who had sent this. A doctor, a palace insider, someone trying to help or destroy him completely. By morning, every major news outlet was covering his breakdown nonstop. Satellite trucks were parked outside the gates. The headlines grew harsher by the hour. Charles's advisors drafted an official statement. The royal family stands by the Duke and Duchess during this trying times. It read. But when Charles saw the draft, he tore it in half. No, he said sharply. We don't stand by lies. He turned to one of his aides. I want every record checked, every file. If there's something to this madness, I want to know before the world does. Meanwhile, Meghan's team worked frantically from Los Angeles, calling in favors from streaming executives, PR strategists, and sympathetic journalists. She released a short statement to TMZ. Harry's comments were taken out of context. We asked for privacy as our family heals, but the damage was far beyond control. Privacy was impossible when your confession was the most replayed clip in the world. Behind closed doors, Meghan was furious. Sources close to her claimed she accused Harry of betraying everything we built. She reportedly smashed her phone during an argument, yelling that he's ruined everything. But Harry wasn't there to defend himself. He had left Montecito hours earlier, driving north along the California coast, desperate for answers. He stopped at a small gas station just outside Santa Barbara. The clerk recognized him immediately. The haunting expression and red hair. Hey, you okay, man? Do you think people can love you and lie to you at the same time? The clerk questioned, to which Harry gave a weak nod. The cashier hesitated before responding. Yeah, happens all the time, to his hushed question. Yeah, I suppose it does, Harry said with a sorrowful smile. The royal family's inner circle back in London scrambled to find a scapegoat, with some blaming Meghan, others blaming American media, and some even blaming Diana's ghost, a constant reminder that truth and tragedy often went hand in hand. But William wasn't looking for someone to blame. He bought a coffee, sat in his car, and stared at the ocean for hours. Every sound reminded him of his mother, the ocean she loved, the silence that followed her, and the lies that were told about her. He was searching for his brother, and he knew that beneath the rage and confusion, Harry was still the same child who used to follow him through the palace corridors, always seeking approval and meaning, but now that the boy was lost. Late that night, William tried again, sending a single text. Whatever you think you found, don't face it alone. Harry read it, but he was unable to respond because, at that very moment, his phone buzzed again, sending another message from an unknown sender. This time it was July 2019, the month of Archie's birth. When he clicked the file, his breath caught in his throat, a private villa somewhere tropical with palm trees visible through the window. Someone behind the camera whispered, "We'll deliver him to the couple within the hour," as a group of people gathered around a crib, and a woman, not Meghan, held a newborn in her arms. The timestamp matched Archie's birth date, and Harry felt the blood drain from his face. The woman appeared somewhat familiar, but her identity was concealed by a surgical mask. Everything is set up. And then the video cut out. Harry sat frozen, heart pounding, trying to process what he had just seen. His whole world tilted on its axis. Was this real? Was it a cruel fabrication? He didn't know. But the name of the file, the timestamp, and the familiar background left little doubt in his mind. He looked out at the Pacific horizon, the sky glowing faintly pink with dawn. The wind held against the car windows. He whispered to himself, what have they done? One thing was certain, though, this wasn't finished. He no longer knew who they were, Meghan, the palace, or the unseen forces that had controlled his entire life. If the video was authentic, then his confession wasn't a mistake. Rather, It was the first step toward revealing something much darker. At that point, he realized that the question that had shattered the palace wasn't simply, "How have your children changed you?" It was everything that question unleashed, every secret it cracked open, every lie it forced into the light. But what came next would make even that confession look small. Because deep within palace archives, one document was about to resurface. One that connected Meghan's mysterious medical trips, missing hospital logs, and the chilling phrase borrowed placement. And when that document reached Harry's hands, the truth about Archie's birth would finally begin to unfold, and the monarchy would never recover from it. The palace is a place built on tradition, protocol, and silence. Every corridor guard, every ceremonial room is steeped in centuries of unspoken rules. Secrets don't just exist here. They thrive. And when Prince Harry's televised confession hit the airwaves, those secrets started to move like shadows across the marble floors. Even before the world had fully grasped his words, the palace's whisper network, the web of aides, stewards, footmen, and confidential staff began buzzing. These were people who knew the inner workings of the monarchy better than anyone. They were the keepers of knowledge that would never appear in public records. People who had seen the cracks in the royal facade long before Harry had broken under them. The first whispers began at 7:32 p.m. local time. Just minutes after the interview aired, an anonymous footman passed a note to his secretary. "Duke's children, something is off. Need verification." The secretary, already aware of the growing chaos, didn't read it. She filed it under sensitive, knowing that anyone else seeing it could be in serious trouble. By the next hour, aides were quietly exchanging emails, encrypted messages hinting at inconsistencies in the records of both Archie and Libet. Inside the private quarters, Charles paced like a caged lion. Every now and then, he stopped mid-step, staring at the ornate walls as though they might answer his questions. He had spent decades navigating scandals, controlling narratives, and keeping the monarchy's reputation intact. But this was different. The whispers weren't just rumors. They were coming from people who had access to the deepest archives, who had seen the documents and the inconsistencies that had always been carefully hidden. One of the advisors, who had worked for the royal family for many years, leaned over the desk and quickly whispered, "Sir, the files for both children don't line up. There are dates that don't match hospital locks, redactions, and missing signatures." Charles froze. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely audible. "There's a reason Harry's breaking down. Something has been covered up for years." Meanwhile, whispers moved like smoke through the palace staff. In the kitchens, the head chef overheard two housekeepers debating why Archie's christening documents were never signed by the usual registrar. In the laundry room, a footman mentioned seeing Lilith's medical records moved from the official file cabinet to a private storage unit. In corridors normally bustling with preparation for state dinners, murmurs replaced footsteps as staff passed along fragments of evidence, building a network of suspicion that had no leader but was entirely cohesive. Some of the whispers were almost instinctive. Palace employees knew patterns. What should be present in a child's birth file? Who should be informed which documents required witness signatures? The fact that these protocols had been bypassed repeatedly set off alarm bells. The network was quiet, cautious, but unrelenting. By the next morning, the internal communications team at the palace had put together a preliminary report that included anomalies, such as medical certificates that were either missing or redacted, unexplained security measures surrounding hospital visits, and cryptic references in digital logs that indicated restricted access to the children's records, with a footnote that said, "Potential familial misrepresentation, verification required." The phrase alone was enough to make even seasoned advisors uneasy. In a small office tucked behind the Queen's former private study, one senior aide pulled a stack of documents labeled "Confidential, do not duplicate." These files contained internal correspondence, travel itineraries, and hospital records, or what was supposed to be hospital records. The aide scanned the pages, noting discrepancies. Some entries were incomplete, signatures were missing, and timestamps contradicted other official documentation. The conclusion was impossible to ignore. Something about Archie and Lilith's early months didn't match up with standard palace protocols. Staff who had worked with the couple for years whispered privately about odd behaviors. A former nanny noted that Meghan had requested certain rooms be off-limits and only select aides could enter, even during hospital visits. A midwife who had worked on high-profile births claimed she had been asked to leave medical logs incomplete. The whispers painted a picture of secrecy that went far beyond the couple's public privacy. The palace communications team tried to suppress information, but the whisper network was organic. By midday, a footman who had been with the family for decades entered an empty break room and whispered to a colleague, "If Harry is saying what I think he's saying, this is bigger than anything Diana went through." Conversations took place in empty hallways and coded phrases appeared, such as placement verification, unverified maternity, and temporary custody. Even among staff, the terminology was chilling, suggesting that someone had altered records to maintain appearances, and the children's true origins were hidden. The colleague nodded silently. They both understood the ramifications. Lineage, legitimacy, and royal succession were not merely theoretical ideas in the palace. They were the foundation of power, and any compromise could have historic repercussions. Advisors throughout the palace argued over whether to notify Charles right away. Some contended that Harry's emotional state might skew the facts, that he might be embellishing or misinterpreting evidence, while others insisted the king needed to know right away. One senior assistant stated, "We have to verify the children's records or risk a catastrophe that no PR team could handle." They found files that had been created, altered, and even erased at odd hours. IP addresses were traced to places that did not match the couple's known residences. Metadata indicated that some records had been altered on devices owned by third parties, outsiders with ties to the couple's private security team, and rumors circulated among the palace's most reputable private doctors, one of whom had reportedly been contacted by another assistant and asked bluntly, "Have you ever seen records like these? Are these patients familiar to you?" "No, these aren't standard records," was the doctor's telling reaction. Something has changed. All of this was taking place while the public was largely unaware of the severity of the situation. Tabloids reported on the meltdown, social media analyzed Harry's facial expressions, and pundits discussed Meghan's role. However, inside the palace, the Whisper Network was constructing a dossier page by page, whisper by whisper, evidence by evidence, and staff members who had previously been silenced by fear were now speaking up cautiously. They were piecing together a story that the monarchy had long avoided, one that implied Archie and Libet might not have been born under circumstances that the public believed. Level of the palace. Advisors began questioning who could be trusted. Security protocols were tightened. Senior staff were summoned for confidential briefings. The Whisper Network had evolved from passive observation into coordinated investigation, and the unease was palpable. One aide, speaking anonymously, later described the atmosphere. You could feel it in the air. Everyone knew something wasn't right. The silence that had once protected the monarchy now felt like a cage. People were afraid, yes, but also determined. They had to know the truth, no matter the risk. By evening, Charles reportedly convened a private meeting with William and senior aides. The conversation was tense. William pressed for transparency. "We need the full picture before we respond. Harry's tears may be emotional, but this goes deeper." Charles, though usually measured, admitted he felt betrayed. "I raised him to value honesty. If this is true, someone has manipulated our family in ways I cannot yet imagine." And amidst all this, Harry remained hundreds of miles away, unaware that the Whisper Network was closing in. Each murmur, each document, each secret acknowledgement by palace staff was bringing the reality closer to the surface. The truth was moving, slow, quiet, unstoppable, and it was only a matter of time before it collided with his confession. But the most startling discovery was yet to come. Deep within the palace archives, behind layers of security, one file had remained untouched for decades. It was marked simply Restricted Lineage Verification. Few had ever seen it. Fewer still knew its contents. And the moment that file emerged, every whisper, every suspicion, every hushed conversation would suddenly make sense. And the implications for Archie and Libet would be undeniable. Because what the palace staff had been whispering for months was not rumor. It was fact. And the truth, when finally unearthed, would shake the monarchy to its core. And that's when one aide realized the unthinkable. Some of the information in those whisper networks pointed to something Harry could never have imagined. A hidden arrangement that involved more than secrecy. It involved deception at the highest levels, manipulation of records, and decisions made far beyond the couple's control. The Whisper Network had grown beyond gossip. It had become a roadmap, a guide to a truth that no one in the palace wanted to confront. And that truth would soon lead to the vanishing records, the missing doctors, and the ultimate revelation of Archie and Libet's origins. But what came next would go deeper than whispers. It would expose the skeletons that had long been buried, and force Harry to confront secrets he hadn't yet imagined. The term vanishing records doesn't sound particularly threatening at first. It evokes a mundane bureaucratic error, a misfiled paper, a forgotten email. But in the context of Buckingham Palace, it meant something far more sinister. Every file, every signature, every medical note was part of a meticulously maintained chain of verification. A chain that guaranteed the legitimacy of everything from royal births to succession rights. When those records disappeared, so too did certainty. It started subtly. A nurse's log for Archie's birth was misfiled. A medical signature for Lilith's delivery was missing. Initial reports dismissed it as human error. Perhaps someone had misplaced a document during the chaos of hospital visits. But as the whispers grew louder inside the palace, more discrepancies began to surface. When Prince Harry asked for copies of Archie's and Lilith's hospital files in early 2022, the staff, already under stress, gave him a series of incomplete records. Some pages were missing, others were clearly retyped with handwriting that seemed inconsistent with official notations, and asterisks indicated footnotes that were nowhere to be found. When Prince Harry asked about it, a senior aide smiled faintly and said, "We'll find them." Official timestamps contradicted diary entries from attending staff. In the meantime, staff who had been with the family for decades started speaking quietly, almost in code. One former nanny admitted under the condition of anonymity that she had noticed unusual instructions. Travel documents mysteriously omitted some trips, especially those involving the children's early weeks. Photographs existed, but metadata revealed inconsistencies. Timestamps didn't match the claimed locations. Invitations to private family events listed children in attendance, but palace logs didn't corroborate it, and so on. Some nights we were told to prepare the nursery but not to bring the children. We'd ask why and no one would answer. Then certain staff would quietly switch the records before anyone could see them. It wasn't just the documentation that raised alarms. Certain personnel associated with the births vanished shortly after their supposed duties. A nurse who had been present for Lilith's delivery was reassigned overseas without explanation. A doctor with access to sensitive files retired abruptly, citing personal reasons, but friends noted he was visibly unsettled. These disappearances coincided eerily with gaps in the official records, leading palace insiders to suspect a coordinated effort to obscure the truth. By mid-2023, Harry had pieced together enough fragments to realize the extent of the problem. There were entire sequences of events that couldn't be verified: who was present at the births, who signed the necessary medical documentation, which hospital rooms were used, and even where the children were during critical early moments. It wasn't a single error. It was a pattern, consistent and deliberate. At the same time, the Palace Archive team discovered a series of documents labeled sensitive that had been moved from the main registry to a secure restricted access vault. These files were hidden behind layers of digital encryption, and only a handful of people knew they existed. When questioned about them, staff claimed they were standard protocol for high-profile births, but internal notes contradicted this. Handwritten annotations suggested the files contained irregularities, mismatched dates, unauthorized signatures, and cryptic remarks such as alternate custody verification and temporary placement. One particularly troubling discovery came from a set of digital logs tracking hospital visits. According to the metadata, some records have been accessed from IP addresses outside the United Kingdom, including locations in California and a private villa in Portugal. Forensic analysis indicated that files had been copied, modified, and sometimes deleted at odd hours. This suggested deliberate tampering, not accidental misfiling. Harry's emotional turmoil escalated as he compared these vanishing records with his own experiences. He recalled moments during the early weeks of Archie's life when access to him was restricted, appointments he was unaware of, caregivers who insisted on secrecy, and instructions from Meghan that seemed unusual. When combined with the missing documents, it painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Something about his children's early life had been hidden from him deliberately and systematically. The palace staff tried to mitigate the internal panic. Some claimed the gaps were due to heightened security measures meant to protect the family from media intrusion. Others argued that the inconsistencies were merely bureaucratic oversights. But when multiple trusted aides started sharing information independently, a clearer pattern emerged. Files didn't just vanish. They were being actively moved, modified, or destroyed. The situation became more alarming when a former aide revealed an internal memo he had discovered months earlier. The memo outlined a procedure for temporary custody verification, referencing children using code names and pseudonyms. It implied that certain children identified only by initials could be placed temporarily in the care of approved staff without leaving any trace in the official records. The implications were chilling. Could this mean that Harry and Meghan's children had at least temporarily been in the care of others? Or worse, had the children themselves been switched at some point? While Harry wrestled with these questions, palace security was already moving. CCTV footage was pulled for review. Staff schedules were scrutinized. Every visit, every handoff, every caretaker involved in the early months was catalogued. In some cases, staff admitted they couldn't remember what they had done, a result of deliberate instructions to forget certain procedures. The term vanishing records had taken on a literal meaning. It wasn't just documentation that disappeared. The events themselves had been engineered to leave no evidence. The emotional impact on Harry was devastating. For a man who had spent years defending his family, protecting their privacy, and maintaining the public image of a modern royal household, discovering that key aspects of his children's lives were shrouded in secrecy felt like a betrayal of the highest order. He had trusted the system, the monarchy, the staff, and even his own instincts. Now all of that trust seemed misplaced. Yet Harry remained determined. He began compiling his own records, dates, times, and events as he remembered them. He cross-referenced them with media reports, photographs, and occasional staff testimony. Every discrepancy fueled his resolve. He couldn't stop asking the same question over and over. What had happened during those early weeks of Archie's and Lilith's lives that was so important it had to be hidden? The vanishing records weren't just administrative failures. They were a symptom of a larger, more insidious effort to conceal the truth. And as Harry delved deeper, he realized the scope extended far beyond missing documents. It involved people, institutions, and systems designed to maintain appearances at any cost. By the time he had reviewed all the evidence, Harry had reached a horrifying conclusion. The inconsistencies were not accidents. They were deliberate. The last piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, a junior archivist who had been surreptitiously monitoring irregularities in the digital record system. She approached Harry with a folder labeled Private and Confidential and whispered, "You need to see this before it's moved again." Somewhere had altered the records and restricted access to guarantee that the truth about his children remained hidden. Inside were detailed notes about missing entries, altered birth logs, and unusual custody arrangements, all tied to the early months of Archie and Lilith's lives. The term temporary placement appeared repeatedly, each time with a different set of initials. Harry stared at the folder, heart pounding. This was it, the confirmation that the vanishing records were part of a deliberate effort to obscure the truth. Every doubt he had, every whisper he had ignored, every instinct telling him something was wrong was now validated. And yet, even with this evidence in hand, the full picture remained incomplete. Names were redacted. Dates were unclear. The documents hinted at a story, but they didn't reveal it in its entirety. Someone still controlled the narrative. Someone still had the power to conceal the final pieces. And that someone, Harry realized with a sinking feeling, was much closer than he had imagined. Because the vanishing records were not just about bureaucracy. They were about control, manipulation, and the ultimate secret behind Archie and Lilith. A secret that, if revealed, could change the monarchy forever. But what came next would expose even deeper mysteries. Secret meetings, hidden conversations, and the first hints of Meghan's role in orchestrating the silence. The world saw Meghan Markle as poised, graceful, and controlled. A woman who seemed to navigate every public appearance with ease, charm, and perfection. But behind closed doors, away from the cameras, the story was far more complex. Those who worked with her closely whispered of late-night meetings, encrypted calls, and a level of secrecy that rivaled any intelligence operation. And for Prince Harry, discovering the extent of these secret meetings was a shock that threatened to upend everything he thought he knew about his family. It began subtly. Staff noticed that certain rooms within the couple's Montecito estate were off-limits, even to those with top clearance. Housekeepers and aides were sometimes redirected, told that meetings were confidential or sensitive with vague instructions to report nothing. Meghan's team insisted it was for privacy, but the pattern of secrecy raised eyebrows. Insiders claimed that she had meetings scheduled at odd hours, often starting late at night and running into the early morning. These gatherings were attended only by a small circle of trusted aides, legal advisors, and sometimes individuals whose identities were not officially recorded. The topics were never disclosed, and any notes taken during the meetings were reportedly shredded or stored in heavily encrypted files. One staff member speaking under anonymity recounted an incident during early 2021. "I was asked to prepare a room for a late meeting. They said it wasn't for a charity or business call. It was something different. There were files brought in, laptops encrypted, and a woman I had never seen before." Meghan gave instructions quietly, but firmly. The tone, it was serious, not the usual public relations planning. Something was happening behind the scenes that no one outside that room was meant to know. Harry noticed the pattern himself. Meetings that he thought would include him were suddenly rescheduled or canceled without explanation. He would see her speaking in hushed tones on her phone, often in another room, ending calls abruptly when he entered. Sometimes he could catch fragments of words, timing, placement, arrangements before Meghan would hang up or switch to another topic. At first, he chalked it up to professional stress. But as months passed, unease grew. The secrecy intensified during key moments of the children's early lives. Insiders recalled that when Meghan was pregnant with Libet, she frequently had private consultations with medical staff that Harry was told not to attend. Security logs showed unusual patterns. New staff members arriving at odd hours, some of whom had no previous record with the family. The combination of restricted access, new personnel, and secretive meetings created an atmosphere of tension, even among the household staff. One particularly revealing account came from a private consultant hired to manage the couple's security. They reported that certain individuals arrived under the cover of darkness carrying medical equipment or documents. Their interactions were brief, and they left before Harry was aware of their presence. According to the consultant, these visits seemed coordinated with Meghan's schedule, and she directed every interaction personally. It wasn't just privacy. The consultant later told a journalist it was orchestration. Encrypted communications also played a role. Meghan reportedly relied on messaging apps with high encryption for discussions that involved sensitive family matters. Staff described overhearing snippets of these conversations, mentions of surrogates, arrangements, and verification processes, but details were always obscured. When Harry attempted to access any of the information, he was met with excuses or firm refusals. The secrecy was total. Even legal advisors were involved in the confidential process. One insider revealed that multiple lawyers coordinated remotely, ensuring that certain documents and agreements were hidden from Harry's view. Contracts were drafted under the guise of privacy and protection for the children, but they contained clauses that limited Harry's access to critical information. Staff began referring to this as the illegal blackout, a period during which Meghan maintained strict control over what was disclosed to anyone, including her husband. Friends of Harry noticed the emotional toll these secret meetings had on him. He became restless. One source said he tried to ask questions and Meghan would deflect or the room would go quiet. He started spending nights alone, pacing the villa, thinking about what could be happening behind those closed doors. He became withdrawn from staff and friends, avoiding casual conversations that might trigger more stress. It was like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that wasn't meant for him to see, the source added. Meanwhile, the palace and media began noticing patterns that correlated with the couple's private activity. Trips and hospital visits had unexplained gaps, and photographs circulated online that seemed staged or inconsistent with official timelines. Observers questioned why certain images of Archie and Lilith were limited to specific angles, and why official statements about births and early milestones seemed vague or delayed. To the palace, these inconsistencies were red flags. To Harry, they were evidence of a deeper deception that was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. The secret meetings also had an emotional dimension. Meghan reportedly used these gatherings to discuss sensitive family matters with advisors, sometimes in the presence of staff who were sworn to secrecy. Discussions reportedly included managing appearances for media outlets, verifying timelines for public events, and even rehearsing explanations for potential inquiries into the children's early lives. Staff described her tone as intense but focused, leaving little room for deviation from the plan. It wasn't only the secrecy that alarmed Harry. It was the content of what he began to learn. Insiders indicated that the meetings sometimes involved surrogate arrangements and alternative placements, highly confidential processes meant to protect the family's image. While details remained sketchy, there were repeated mentions of temporary custody, controlled access, and timing of the children's appearances in public. The pattern suggested a deliberate effort to control both perception and information, and Harry had been largely excluded from it. By late 2022, Harry's frustration reached a boiling point. Staff confirmed that meetings continued even when he was present in the villa. He confronted Meghan directly, asking for transparency. She responded with calm but firm insistence on privacy. "This is about protecting the children," she told him. "You'll understand when the time comes." Harry left those conversations unsettled, sensing that something critical was being withheld and that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. The pattern culminated in a meeting that Harry was not invited to, a meeting that was allegedly held in early 2023 with a small group of advisors, middlemen, and unidentified people. According to palace insiders, the agenda included procedures for both children's verification, changes to official records, and plans to handle any possible questions from outside authorities. The meeting was extremely secretive. Staff members were told to leave the premises completely during the discussion, and any paperwork was encrypted right away.